Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about Saturn transits and what they mean. This is going to be specifically for Saturn transits to personal planets, but some of the information that I'm going to share about Saturn transits in general can apply to when Saturn transits to points in your chart, or maybe like the outer planets too a little bit, but Saturn transits to outer planets kind of reflect a broader growth and development, but some of it might still be able to apply. So I want to talk about what the purpose of Saturn transits are. And I'm calling this video our coming of age stories because I think that that is what happens during Saturn transits. I think that that's actually what they're about. So I feel like I have a lot to say in this video, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. So to start off, I'm going to explain what a Saturn transit actually is. What I'm talking about in this video is when the transiting Saturn, like where Saturn is at currently right now, when he makes a direct aspect to a natal planet or point in your birth chart. Saturn transits can usually last up to 2 months or even longer if Saturn happens to retrograde when he's making the aspect to your planet or point. But this obviously depends on how far you extend your transit orbs. 2 to 3 orbs usually works for me. For the outer planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I usually extend them to 3. I think for Jupiter and Saturn, 2 might work a little bit better. But of course, you're going to feel the Saturn transit the most intensely when he makes the 0-degree orb, and that usually lasts about a week and a half. So what happens then during a Saturn transit? So Saturn represents the skin of the body. Saturn is our sense of structure and order. The way I see and have personally experienced Saturn transits is that Saturn comes in and creates a shell around that planet. Depending on the aspect that Saturn's making, this shell can feel either binding or like a protective force around the planet as it's developing. A good way to understand this is to think of crabs that are obviously represent Cancer and the moon. So crabs have a shell, right? And this shell protects them as they grow. And this is actually a good way to understand the opposition between Cancer and the moon and Saturn and Capricorn. Saturn is the shell that contains and protects the moon of Cancer. As it's, held within that shell, the moon is finding itself. It's developing a connection to itself. And it's being refined until it develops and transforms into a crystallized version of itself. And then that's when it can outgrow that shell around it, and move on to another shell. So this is what happens during a Saturn transit. A shell is created around ourselves, our personality structures, the building blocks of our personality, or we create that shell for ourselves so that we can turn inwards and restructure these pieces of our personality. It's just creating a space for us to do this work on ourselves. So with easy aspects, this is obviously going to feel more supportive. And with hard aspects, that shell can feel more limiting. And we're learning to step out of those limitations. We're learning how to grow out of it with the harder aspects. Really, the purpose of Saturn transits is to help us mature. And this is why I'm titling this video our coming of age stories. Coming of age stories are stories of characters and how they grow from their youth to adulthood. And I think that these stories occur for us throughout our life. Like, I don't think that they're just from youth to adulthood. I think that even as adults, we can still have experiences that are helping us to mature even more. I mean, that's just part of life. And coming of age stories, they're characterized by the monologue of the character that's, going through that process in the story, the movie, or the book, whatever. So I think that Saturn creates that inner monologue that is seen in the coming of age stories, because the planets become more self-introspective. They're turned inwards. We go into that shell again and we reflect on our purpose and our goals, especially when it comes to what that planet represents. That introspection is what helps the planets mature, because our outlook on what that planet signifies, it just deepens, and our outlook in general matures as well. We don't act on youthful whims anymore. We begin to take ourselves more seriously. And this is why Saturn transits are also known for bringing some kind of tangible physical rewards, because that's what we're working towards with these transits. It's both an outer restructuring when it comes to, like, the material success, but it's also, there's an internal process that occurs with that as well. As we mature internally, it's like our growth on the outside tends to also become more structured, become more stable, because Saturn obviously shows up physically in the material world. So when we have Saturn transits to personal planets, we can even change noticeably to others, because the outward expression of that planet can become more quieter or more serious. It's like we become more introverted or stoic, because again, that planet has a shell around it. And we also take more responsibility with Saturn transits because of the change in our outlook. We can tend to see more real, physical, material changes around us. And these changes are leading us towards Saturn's sense of success and achievement. We're basically just growing up more with Saturn transits, regardless of our age, and we're starting to recognize our innate wisdom. So now I want to talk more about the Saturn transit aspects. So conjunctions feel more like the planet is being closed in on and suffocated. That part of your personality can suddenly feel more rigid, or like there's a shell around it that stops it from expressing itself freely or fluidly. But again, that shell is just trying to allow for that space for it to eventually come out fully blossomed. Trines feel more masterful. Like we feel more secure with that part of our personality. It feels like that planet that Saturn is making a trine aspect to isn't getting in the way of how we want to establish ourselves in the world. Instead, we're actually using it. We're using that planet to support some kind of end goal for ourselves. Sextiles feel useful. The achievements that we can see with sextiles can seem more subtle, but I like to think of the sextiles as setting a foundation. Those subtle achievements can actually lead to bigger achievements in general. We're taking on more responsibility with sextiles, and the progress that we're making with that planet and its development is helping that planet mature and grow in its expression. Squares also create more of that feeling of being suffocated, and it can create a deeper tension and a struggle with our sense of what is right and what is wrong, and how we naturally want to express ourselves. And we can feel with squares that we reach kind of a breaking point where we literally snap out of our own binds. There's a need to adjust that planet and how it's going to contribute to our sense of success. Oppositions require more negotiation. So when Saturn makes an opposition to a personal planet, it's like that planet has to become more aware of how it directs its energy towards a Saturn goal. This can be an eye-opening transit because it's more about how you orient yourself practically in order to reach success or stability. It's also how we deal with authority. So oppositions are more externalized than other aspects because that planet is seeing the Saturn goal more directly or more clearly. So it's needing to mature how it directs itself. When Saturn makes a transit aspect to your sun, the easy aspects are great because with the easy aspects, our identity and self-projection is becoming solidified. So we feel more self-assured, and this is reflected in how we are seen by others, our social standing or our reputation. We can take on more social responsibility in terms of our career and our goals, or, the work that we're doing at that point in our life. And with the easy aspects, it feels more like our identity is actually fitting in with what we've always wanted to be, or how we've always wanted to be seen by others. Now, with the hard aspects, we struggle more with confidence, or feeling like we can't seem to reach our goals. It's less about the physical things, like with Venus, and more about our ideas of ourselves and who we are and how we're seen. And it can just feel like we're not there yet, like we're not where we want to be. And that realization can be hard to swallow when Saturn makes a hard aspect to your sun. But it's actually a chance for us to see if our goals are what we actually want. So it's a good opportunity to take that time to connect to what you're actually passionate about and your own individuality. It's also about setting realistic goals for yourself, because when Saturn makes hard aspects to your sun, we tend to set the bar high. So we can feel like we're not meeting goals, but they might not be realistic. We also have to acknowledge every bit of effort we make for what it's worth. When Saturn makes an aspect to the moon, our emotions and how we deal with them are maturing. So we're becoming more grounded and self-reliant. So the easy aspects indicate that this process will be smooth, and how we deal with domestic matters or our family will be more grounded. Our emotions are less all over the place and more stable. We can actually feel like we understand our emotions and feel more emotionally fulfilled by our progress towards achieving goals, or with our work, or with our home life. With harder aspects, this same process occurs, but usually as a result of feeling too self-contained. Again, that Saturn shell around our inner world, which is the moon, it can begin to feel too tight. So emotionally, we can feel like we're lacking fulfillment or true contentment. These transits are teaching us how to break free from that limitation and find real ways to support our emotional needs. When Saturn transits to your Mercury, your outlook is maturing. It can seem or feel like we're thinking more pessimistically, but we're really being a little bit more realistic. With harder aspects, it can feel like we have to exert more mental effort to fully comprehend or assimilate new knowledge or information. But in general, with the easy aspects and also what we're learning with the hard aspects, is how to apply our knowledge, how to use our information, or how to implement our skills in ways that are going to actually help us achieve our goals. These transits can actually help crystallize your knowledge, which is something that happens naturally as we age. And this means that the knowledge that we acquire in life, it becomes more solidified in our memory. Saturn transits to Venus mature our relationships and how we deal with money. So Saturn transits can actually make us more frugal, more inclined to save more and spend less. Now, depending on the aspect that it makes, it can be because we actually do have less money to spend, or it can just be that we perceive our financial situation to be that way, so we're trying to be more practical. We can actually be more interested in the quality of things rather than quantity, or become more interested in potential investments. With the harder aspects, we can also feel like we struggle physically, like our sensuality is more hidden. We can even become more modest or formal in our style or in our tastes, our interests, what we want out of relationships, or even the partners that we might select. We can also go into a shell because we can feel more insecure about our own self-worth and value. Again, it's tied into how we're restructuring our relationship with money and our social expressions. So our relationships can mature too, or it's more of a maturing in our desires when it comes to relationships. So we can look for more stability or desire more responsibility from our partners or in our relationships. We can tend to lean more towards a traditional or committed approach to relationships. When Saturn transits to Mars, our impulses and how we assert ourselves is becoming more refined. We're less reckless and less risk-taking because we're more focused on directing our energy in practical ways. This can even show up in our physical energy too, like how we physically feel, and it's more about directing our energy in constructive ways. So easy aspects can boost confidence in how we assert ourselves because it can feel like winning battles just comes naturally, and how we direct our actions towards achieving goals can feel more supported. Hard aspects feel frustrating because there's like a buildup of tension with the hard aspects, especially with the square and even the conjunction. It can feel like there's something building up, like resentment or anger, and that is just going to unleash eventually. But we have to make sure that we're letting our energy out in healthy ways. With harder aspects, it can also feel like there's more obstacles in the way of getting what we want, especially from those that we perceive as authority figures in our life. With the hard aspects, we're learning how to adjust our actions to those obstacles. So we're not just being frustrated, we're learning how to reorient ourselves. I think a good way to understand like Mars, Saturn hard aspects to Mars in the natal chart or transiting in general, because eventually we all have to learn this lesson, is when you think of sailing a boat and like think of hitting a rock in the water, instead of just ramming your boat into the rock, like you have to kind of reel it back and reassess the situation so that you can find a new way to orient yourself around the rock, because the rock isn't going to move, the obstacles aren't going to move, so you have to figure out how am I going to readjust myself to move around it. That was my video for Saturn transits. I know I had a lot to say. I hope that you can use this information to help you understand Saturn transits and why they're actually really important. They're obviously less chaotic than Pluto transits, which I did make a video on Pluto transits if you want to watch that one to learn about Pluto transits, but Saturn transits are more about growing up. I mean, that's really all that it is. It's more about the real world. It's more about becoming who you feel like you're supposed to be. It's more about helping you achieve the goals that you have for your life. They're hard because you have to mature internally, and then that is reflected in the kind of success and stability you're going to have around you. Saturn transits are interesting in that way. Let me know what you think about this video, and feel free to share your experiences with Saturn transits down below, and I will talk to you next time.